Welcome to the purchase order inventory webinar for the job cost software. Under File, Purchase Order. Purchase order is where you would enter and maintain existing purchase orders. You come up to a live record when you first get into the software. You can use binoculars and you can search to bring up a search grid. You can search different purchase order numbers for things that you previously entered. Your purchase order will have a specific number that will default, and there is a spot in the control file that keeps track of the last purchase order number used. So if I were to hit the plus key to add a new one, it would populate the next purchase order number in line, which in this case is 1033. Then I could change that if I wanted to. I can use any type of number up here or even letters. I can say, I can change this to webinar purchase order number if I don't want to use that number that's existing. Vendor ID is who are you purchasing it from. So I can hit F12 here and it'll bring me up a list of my vendors. Now these are the vendors I have in the system, and it's expecting me to use one that already exists. I can't just type in what I want or a different vendor that doesn't already exist in my vendor list. So I can scroll down here and I want to use the concrete vendor. And here's a feature that we have in accounts payable that tracks insurance certificates. And it will give you the message that the insurance certificate is expired for this vendor. And then you'll be able to go to the vendor and you can see what the expiration date is and when you need to get a new one, that you need to call them to get a new insurance certificate. This is just a warning. It will allow you to continue on by clicking OK. So then defaults the vendor information here. Purchase contact is the name of the person who you might be calling to contact. Bill vendor ID would mean if you were to purchase this from this vendor, but they bill under a different vendor. So they have a parent company that they would send their invoices from. You could make a note of the parent company so that you know who the bill is going to come from, because it's not going to come from the vendor that you actually ordered it from. To be ordered date, you could set these up in advance if you want to say that I want to have this ordered, let's say I want to have it ordered on August 1st. I could put a to be ordered date of August 1st. Say I require this to be delivered by the 15th, so I could have a required date in there so that my purchaser knows when I need to have it delivered. The acknowledged date would be that they acknowledged the order. So if I acknowledged it, I could acknowledge it today. Approved date was when the order got approved. Order date would be, or the buy here is looking for an employee name. So you do an F12 in that field to bring up my employee list, and I can select the employee that ordered it. I can also select an order date, so I can say that I ordered it tomorrow, and then I can say who ordered it. Now, if I don't have an employee number that I can use, I can just type a name in this name section here. It doesn't have to exist on my employee list if I just type a name in here. But if I wanted to use a current employee, I could look it up by entering the ID in here or doing the F12. Service call ID is an informational field that you could, if you had a service call number, you could put that number here or any other number that you need to keep track of. Header notes and footer notes do print on the purchase order, so you can put different notes if you want information, that special information about this order, special directions or special instructions that you need to keep track of for this order. The ship to, if you want it just, if it's just shipping to your warehouse, It defaults already to your company name. If you want to direct ship it to a job, you would click on the direct ship button, and then you could use F12 in the job ID field, and it would come up with a list of jobs. So I could say that I want to direct ship it to this job. The name is still defaulting to my company name, which is a demo company. But I'm shipping it to this job now. I'm direct shipping it to this job. I can change these addresses if I want it to show the job's address and state and zip. I can put in terms. This, again, is not an F12 field. You just have to put in whatever terms that you have. So I could type in net 30. Shipping terms could be, 10 days, whatever your shipping terms are, whatever your billing terms are. Billing terms would be the net 30. The shipping via would actually be like UPS, FedEx, USPS, whatever, however you're planning on having it shipped or however you want to have it shipped. You've got a tax status, which is different tax, if it's tax exempt, non-taxable, out of state, resale, use tax, enterprise, depending upon the type of job you're doing, would determine the tax status. You could also track the tax ID. If you're doing this for a certain job and that job has a tax ID, which makes it tax exempt, you could put that tax ID in here. And you would go to the Detail tab, and on the Detail tab, it shows you the purchase order number if you had a service call in there, the vendor, who it was ordered by. It also defaults the job onto the first detail line because we put a job in the direct ship column. If there was no job there, then the job would be blank here. I could still add a job number on the detail line, but I would have to manually enter that. So if I did not want to direct ship this, and I took that out, and I go over to detail, my job would be blank like this, and I could hit F12, and I could take my pick of jobs that I have and put a new job, or put a job number out there. Now this, since I've changed the job I originally did, it wants to change my tax status from tax exempt to taxable because it's reading that from the job file. So it goes to the job file and checks the tax status, and that job is not tax exempt. So if I say yes here, now this has changed from it was exempt to now it's taxable. So my phase ID, I can either start typing the name of a phase, and it will get me as close as it can, or I can use F12 and I can choose a phase ID. Cost type is going to default based on what the phase is. So it's either going to be material or subcontract in this case for these companies. I can change that to subcontract if I want it to be a subcontract phase. My GL account number will default from the control file, the job cost control file that I have set up. For any cost type that is subcontract, I want to use account 450. If I change this back to material and I tab over, it changes the account to 440, which if you look at the bottom of the screen here, 440 is job cost material. I go back to subcontract, 450 is job cost subcontracts. Now if you happen to have our inventory module, the item ID field, if you do an F12, you will get a list of inventory items. So then you can track what inventory items you are purchasing on this purchase order. So we are going to purchase anchor bolts. And then you can go to the description. Now this description is defaulting from the item ID. And it defaults, I can change this description, I can add to it I can get rid of it altogether if I want to. Or I can just anchor bolts for footing work. I can add to it if I want. Now, if I want to see a bigger section here in description, I can hover over the edges of the description field where I get my two arrows and I can pull this wider. I can do the same thing on this line here, and I can pull this wider, and I can make this screen bigger if I have a large description that I want to put in here and I want to kind of see it all. I don't want it to, get it off the page. Now, this will not stay like this once I exit the screen and get back into it. It will revert back to the normal size. So if I tab off of that field, my next field would be ordered. So I can put in my quantity ordered. Say we did 100. The unit of measure is the next field, which defaults from the invoice item ID. Purchase price, also the price of it also defaults from the invoice item ID. And the price unit of measure also defaults. It gives me a subtotal. I can add sales tax here. If I have a sales tax percent, and let's say I want to add 5% sales tax, then it calculates it out. If I know there's going to be freight, I can add my freight percentage. That will also calculate it out. And then it gives me a total, adding the 21, the sales tax amount of 105, and the freight amount of 21. Then on the end of the purchase order here, the end of the row shows received, date, and invoice number. These three fields are for when you have received the product in from the vendor, either in your yard or at the job site. These can be filled in manually by either clicking the received arrow here. So this column is for received. You received the line. So I can click on that, and it will say I've received 100 on this date. And it just defaults to today's date. I can change this if I want to. Say I received them yesterday, and I want it to be yesterday's date. I can change it to the 18th. Now the invoice number is linked to accounts payable. So if I have an accounts payable invoice number, I can type in the number here if I know it, or I can receive this purchase order through accounts payable when I enter my invoice. There is a button that says Receive PO. So if I want to delete this receipt, so let's say I want to zero this out. Yes, I want to change that. If I go to File, Accounts Payable, Invoices, and I add a new invoice, and I do my purchase order of webinar, it's going to give me that insurance certificate message again. Put in my date. And it's going to default then my invoice amounts from the purchase order. And then I have a Receive PO button here. That will take me to the invoice screen, or the purchase order screen from the invoice screen. I can click on, I have an option to receive all down here. If I click on that, it'll put in that I received 100 and put my invoice number in there automatically. If I take that back out, I can also click on this Receive button here, and it will do the same thing if I'm just receiving certain lines. If I have multiple lines on this PO and I just want to receive certain lines, then I would click this receive button on the lines that I want to receive. Or if I want to receive the entire purchase order, I can click the receive all. Now, if I only got a portion of what I ordered, I would want to change my quantity received. Let's say I only got 50. Yes, I want to change my quantity received, and then it's going to ask me if I want to enter a back order for the remaining quantity. Because I've received 50, but I still have 50 owed to me that I have not received yet. So then I can say yes, and then it added the second detail line, changes my top line to be 50 ordered, and then this one says 50 ordered, 0 received. Changes my amounts. And so now this received line is linked to my AP invoice number for accounting purposes. So then if I say OK here, and yes, I want to save my changes, and it takes me back to the invoice, and it has the line here of the detail that I paid, that I received for this, that I'm going to pay. And then it also shows the sales tax as a separate invoice line. So then here is my sales tax. This is my sales tax GL account number. This is my job cost subcontracts GL account number. So we're going to undo that and get back into purchase order. So those are ways to receive the purchase order. The serial number ID and asset tag works with, we have a, it is like a gun that would automatically read a barcode scanner, is what it's called. It's a barcode scanner. It would automatically read your asset tags, which is your barcodes on different products and items. And you can, the barcode scanner is a separate purchase or module. And it would automatically put in, you could automatically count how many of these you have, or if you put an asset tag and a serial ID on here, you can track where it's at in your warehouse. You can track, have the bar scanner automatically update the quantities that you received. You can check with your salesman if you're interested in doing that for more information. You have the option on purchase orders to copy a purchase order. All that does is brings up a screen, asks you what, this is the purchase order you want to copy. What number do you want to copy it to? Again, it defaults to the next purchase order number in line, which is still the 1033. And it will just create an exact copy of this purchase order. So if you're ordering the same thing for multiple jobs, you could copy the purchase order and then just change the job ID on the detail lines to be the correct job. You have the option to email the purchase order by clicking the email button. You can change the heading on the purchase order to be a subcontract agreement, any of these options, or have no heading at all if that's what you choose. And then you can print prices or item ID. It defaults to that. And you can print a signature line or no signature. If you had a signature on file where you have a copy of a signature stored on like the employee, on the employee file, then the signature file would become active and you could select that option and it would automatically print the signature on the signature line. So this creates an email, and it's going to go to the email address on the vendor that you're ordering it from, and it's going to tell you to please process the attached PO. It's going to show who it was approved by. You can change the wording manually here. This defaults in. It can be manually changed. If you open up this, then the attachment will show you a copy of the purchase order. Now you'll notice there are header notes here. This is where the header notes would display. And then this is where footer notes display. And there's a bunch of other notes here. This section of notes right here comes from the control file. So in admin purchase order controls, these are your control file options where it shows you the last purchase order number used. It gives you options to put wording in here. The wording will show when you print a purchase order for this cost type. So these are your different cost types. So because I have a cost type of material on this purchase order, it's going to print this information. So if I look at this purchase order, this will print the information that's here. Actually, it's actually showing us the subcontractor one. So if I go to the subcontract type, it's actually showing this. So if my cost type is material, it will show me what's on the material tab. If my cost type is subcontract, it will show me what's on the subcontractors tab. If I use any of these other ones, I could put something in there and it would show me that also. So here, because we did change this to subcontractor, this is showing the subcontractor information. Header and footer notes section here is another place where you could store custom header and footer notes that you maybe want to show on each purchase order. So instead of typing them individually on each purchase order, you could put them here and they would always print for every purchase order. You have print options here. You can use company logos on purchase orders. So when you print the purchase order, it would show your company logo. It has to be a JPEG or a PNG file that would be 1 inch by 7.5 inches. It would have to fit in this box here. You would browse using the browse button out to your computer wherever your logos are stored. And then you could, might have a logo here I can use. You put that in and then it would show the company's logo, which would print as a header instead of just a company name, address, and phone number in block format. You could default a signature if you want the same signature to default every time on your purchase orders. You could put a signature image, again, a JPEG file or a PNG file or some kind of picture file that is 1 inch by 3.5 inches. Again, you would browse to wherever that signature file is located so that the path populates here, and then it will show the picture of the signature there. The PO control file, it's where it stores the last purchase order number used. If you're a reseller and you have a resale number, you could put your resale number here so that it prints on the purchase order. It stores your default cost type. So when you enter a new purchase order, what cost type do you want it to default to? Shows you your committed cost type bucket. So what cost bucket do you want it to go into? It's usually always open PO. You can select if you want to update inventory prices when you enter, when you're purchasing stuff for inventory items. You have the options to update your prices in inventory. So you can always update your inventory item prices based on what your latest purchase order reads. You can never update them, and you'll have to update them manually, or it can prompt you to update the inventory item price and purchase date. Because you could purchase items at 2 different prices 2 weeks in a row with all the fluctuation of prices. So just based on how your company would like to track your inventory prices. These are other options that you can turn on or off. If you want to use discounts, if you use sales tax and freight. Now, because those are checked, my sales tax and my purchase order detail lines, because those are checked, I have sales tax and freight showing. If those were unchecked, freight would not show and sales tax would not show if one of those was unchecked. So if you want them to show, you would just need to go to the control file and check them. You don't want them to show, you could uncheck them. You could also default what general ledger account number you want to have for sales tax and for freight. So if I wanted to put a freight account number in here, I could start typing freight and see if I had an account number that would apply to that, and it doesn't appear that there is one out here called freight. But I could put in, if I had one, I could select it and it would default it. To print the purchase order, it would be, you hit the print button, and it gives you the same options as it did for emailing. You have pretty much the same screen as the email PO did. So if you change your heading, when you go to print it, it comes to the screen and it says subcontractor agreement instead of purchase order. And this is the block lettering that I said would change when you put in your logo, your company logo. So instead of just the block lettering, it would be your company logo. You have your header notes, your footer notes, and then your customized notes from the control file. Shows you each item, the fact that we received this item already, but we still have 50 outstanding, who it was approved by, who it was ordered by, your signature lines, and then a vendor signature line. Now, when I go to print this, I can also use a PDF. I can print them to PDF if I want, if I have a Qt PDF writer printer set up. Qt PDF is a free PDF program that you can download from the internet, and once you install it, it will then show up as an option to print to, and it creates a PDF file, which pretty much is the same thing as the email feature does, but it doesn't attach it to an email. It would be a way for you to save your purchase orders. Instead of printing them to paper, you could save them in a location on your computer somewhere instead of printing them and saving them in a file. If you don't want to see prices or the item ID and you uncheck that, then it just shows you quantities and it doesn't give you any prices or items. It doesn't show you the ID, it just shows you the description of the item. Under purchase order reports, you can print a list of your purchase orders. So if I want to go to the screen with this, I can get a list of all the purchase orders that I have in the system. This just gives me a basic detail of what the ordered amount was and the dates. Now, if I want to get a little more detailed on the purchase orders, I can check the print detail option. Then it activates the item ID where I can just print it for a certain inventory item. So if I just want to do my anchor bolts, I want to see how many anchor bolts do I have on order. I think it was this one. Then I can get a listing just for the different purchase orders that have anchor bolts on them. And it's just this one purchase order that we've been working on. And I can see how much, because I clicked detail, I can see the quantity I've received already, and I can see how many are still waiting for it to come in. Now you can also change that, and if you print that and you want detail, I can choose received or not received. So if I want to see how many I still have coming, and I want to get my anchor bolts not received, it would show me how many are not received yet and what purchase orders. If I want to see all things that are not received, I want to see all purchase orders that I have not received yet, I can then get a list of detail, who I ordered them from, what the items are, and what I'm waiting for when they were ordered. So then I can follow up on my open orders. Batch purchase order is a way to print purchase orders in a group. So you can print a group of purchase orders at one time. So if you're issuing 10 purchase orders to the same company and you don't want to print them one at a time, you could print them in a batch. And you could say a beginning purchase order number, ending purchase order number. You could go by job if they're all for one particular job, or by vendor if you want to do it all for one vendor, or by order date if you want to print you don't want to print them as you're entering them every day, but you want to say, I want all purchase orders that were ordered today. I want to see a list of all purchase orders. I want to print all purchase orders that have an order list of today. Or tomorrow. Well, now this is just a way to print a batch of purchase orders. So basically it would come up and it would show you, give you each purchase order that you have out there for that time frame. Already looked at admin purchase order. There is a conversion table that is used if you're converting quantities from like each. You can convert the quantities and the price unit of measures if they're different. By entering the correct conversion factor in there. Purging transactions is a way to clean up your purchase order file. So if you have purchase orders that have been received and they're no longer needed in the file and you want to remove them from file, purchase order list, you can delete them, or not delete them, but purge them based on either a purchase order number range, a vendor ID range, a job ID range, or you can base it on completion date, or you can base it on received purchase orders. You have several options. If you based it on a received or completion date, you would enter the date. So you want to purge purchase orders that are, 5 years old. You could enter a date as of, 12/31/2012, and it would purge purchase orders thereback. Inventory. You have an items list. This is where you would enter or maintain inventory items. You have item IDs. If you have a barcode, that can be entered there. A reference ID is just, stick with the anchor bolt here. Reference ID is just internal information for the reference number, whatever you want to put in there. If you need a reference number of some sort. You got your description. You can put a manufacturer ID in there. If you hit F12, it comes up with the vendor list. It's looking for a vendor list and manufacturer ID. Product class, that would be what product class that this is for. Is it labor, material, time and material items? This one is set to material. Cost type would be your job cost types, which either are material or subcontract in this case. If you want a default general ledger account number because you don't use cost types, if you don't use cost types, you can put a default general ledger account number in the expense account number here. If you do use cost types, you don't need to have a default expense account number. Location could be the location in your warehouse where this is stored. If you have it stored in a certain section, certain area, you could manually put in the location. Same with the pack size. Unit of measure is how these are sold for quantity and for price. You may buy something in rolls, but then you may sell it by lineal footage. So your selling price would be based on lineal footage, but the quantity that you purchase would be rolls. Your purchase price, which would default in from the PO, if you have your system set up that way, defaults into this spot here with the date that it was purchased from the purchase order. Sales price is something that you would set up. What do you want to sell it as of? And normally you can track like some kind of markup where you can say, I want to mark it up. This one is set to mark up, 257%. Of the purchase price. Job price, it's the same thing. I can put, I can say I want to mark it up 15%, and then it will calculate my job price. I can set a reorder quantity so that when my quantity on hand gets to a certain level, I want to reorder it. If this is set, there's a list, a report you can print that will show you the reorder quantity and then what the current level is. So if I'm currently at 200 and my reorder quantity is 150, it will check this level, and when it gets to be under 150, we'll put it on the list. So if I change this to 100, excuse me, this would be the number of days it's going to take me to reorder it. So if I know that this item takes 2 weeks to get, and I know I'm going to need them by then, or I might want to order it, within a certain amount of time, so I get it in time for my job. If I know it takes a long time to order. You can track if this item is taxable by checking the box here. You can automatically create requisitions from accounts receivable, which means if you enter this item on an accounts receivable invoice, it will automatically enter a requisition in the requisition screen for this item, showing that it was shipped out to a job. Same thing with receipts from purchase orders. When you receive this item in from a purchase order, if this box is checked, it will automatically create a receipt showing that you added this much into inventory, whatever's on your purchase order. The requisition is basically you're taking this much out of inventory. So the AR invoice, whatever quantity you put on there with this item number, it's going to subtract it from your inventory totals. Up here you have quantity on hand, which in this case it shows that there's 0 quantity on hand. You can click on this Receipts and Requisitions button, and it would give you a drill down of your inventory, receipts, and requisitions. There are no records here. Unreceived POs should bring up the webinar PO, which it does. And it shows you what the inventory item is for this, what the unreceived POs are for this inventory item. Notes is just a blank notes page where you can keep other information about this item. User fields are customizable. You can change these labels to be whatever you need to keep track of. Additional information that there's no room for on the item screen. You can set inventory custom pricing per job or per customer. If you want to give a certain job or a certain customer extra, or you want to charge them more, or you want to charge them less, you want to give them a discount for labor, it will take that inventory item and the discount of 10%. So when you enter an invoice for this customer or this job and you use the item ID, instead of defaulting to the sale price of $45, it will default to the discounted price of $40.50. So you can set this up for different items, different jobs. It looks like we only have one set up in this company. Receipts is where you can enter receipts manually for items that you receive in from your purchase orders, or it'll automatically enter this receipt if that option is turned on. It'll automatically create this receipt entry. So basically this is, you're receiving from this vendor, or whatever vendor was on the purchase order, you are receiving into a certain, whatever warehouse you select. You can have different warehouses. The item, you're receiving $500 at this price. So this adds it onto your inventory. It adds it to your quantity on hand. So your quantity on hand total here at the bottom for this particular item is 507. So if I were to go back to my anchor bolt item, and I said create receipt from purchase order, and I go back to my purchase order, and I am going to add my invoice number back on here. I'm going to delete this. I have to repopulate it. Now I'm going to receive it, and I'm going to save it. Now I should be able to did not do that. Now, it should have created my receipt, and it didn't. So on inventory requisitions, from accounts receivable, it will automatically enter a requisition when you enter it onto the invoice. It'll give it a requisition number and a date. You can also manually enter requisitions by hitting the plus key. Put a job ID on there and a phase, again, the warehouse, your item ID, your quantity. That will reduce the quantity on hand. will show you the quantity on hand here. It'll pull the price from the inventory item. So if I do a one from the webinar, I do today's date, job 10, phase 10, anchor bolts, material, and I want to do 100. Changes my quantity on hand to be 0 or negative 100, from 0 to a negative 100. Now if I want to go in and manually enter a receipt for anchor bolts, I want to say I received 150. Now my quantity on hand says 50. I can save that because I've received 150 and I took out 100. Now if I look at my inventory item, my quantity on hand now says 50, and I should have some receipts and requisitions. So on this screen, it will show receipts as positive black numbers. Requisitions are red lines, and it has a negative total. So this is what you're adding in. This is what you're taking out. So this is a way that you can keep track of what came in or out if you want to look and see, why are my quantities off? How did they become off? This is one place where you could look at that and see what the activity was on that. In inventory, you have an option to import transactions, where you could import your inventory. This is basically used for when you're taking a physical count of inventory. You can then import your transactions into here to update your records of quantities on hand. You can also import new items if you have new items that you want to set up. We have a listing of the file format it needs to be in. It needs to come from an Excel spreadsheet or a text file, and it needs to be imported in a certain order. And that is on the README. There's a README document in this folder on our software that has all of our import file layouts. We have an option for drill down in inventory, which will show you the different items and the quantities on hand, kind of give you an idea as to where you're at with each item. You can drill into that item to get your information. Now this is the same screen that pops up for the receipts and requisitions button. So you can see for whatever job that you want, whatever item you want to look at, what your different items that you've received or that you've taken out. It also gives you a value down here, if I can get my mouse to work, of your inventory. So as it stands right now for this company, the total value of my inventory is $61,000. You can post requisitions. That's part of the monthly close for inventory. Receipts do not need to be posted because receipts have no general ledger accounting effect, but requisitions do, so they need to be posted. And that's just the same as the other posting steps and the other modules. Reports inventory, you have drill down again. It's the same drill down screen as the other one. You can, on the drill down screen, select an ending date. So if I want to do this, let's say I want to see it as a 5/31. Your numbers may change on that if you have receipts and requisitions. So you'll notice that anchor bolts is no longer up here because that did not have any value as of 5/31. So if I let it ride on that, anchor bolts is here, my amount's slightly different than when I do it as of a certain date. You can get an item list, which is just a list of all your inventory items. You can get an item detail list, which is a detail of all your items. And it would show you the purchase prices, your unit of measures, quantities, and all the information basically from the inventory screen. Your item price list is just a list of your purchase prices and your job prices and your sales prices per item. Customer pricing, if you have customer pricing, it will show you who you have special pricing for and what that is. Quantities on hand. This would show you the quantities of your inventory without prices. If I want to see zero balances, I can check mark that option. And then it shows me everything with quantity and without. I just want to see things that I have on hand. This could be a useful report for when I'm trying to take a physical inventory to verify what the computer says I have on hand versus what I actually go out and physically count. Quantity on hand with prices will show you the prices and give you a value of your inventory. Transaction detail is like an edit report that shows you what your transactions have been for each item. So here you'll see on our anchor bolt item, we have a receipt and a requisition, positive and a negative. Shows you the transactions. As of a certain date, you can run this, or for a certain month. So you would run this every month, every week, whatever, if you want to see what the activity was for your inventory. Reorder. If I set my inventory item, reorder quantity, reorder level. And if I save that, let's put in 15 days. If I run my inventory, reorder, I should see that I have a quantity on hand. My reorder level is when it gets to be 100, I want to reorder quantity of another 100. And it's going to take 15 days, so I want to make sure that I order it to give myself enough time to get in and to get it into the warehouse. My receipt edit will give me a list of my receipts that I've entered. And it gives you your report totals, so you can see the quantity and then the total cost. You also can get a requisition edit, which would be a list of your requisitions. This report will produce a Excel spreadsheet that will show you what you need to, basically it's like the reorder quantity report, but it exports it to Excel so that you can manipulate it if you need to. Under Admin Inventory Controls, you have your default warehouse that you can set. You can set a cost type if you wish, a requisition cost method. You can either do by purchase price or by weighted average. Purchase price means that every time you purchase the item, and it's going to take that price that you currently purchased it at and set that price on your inventory item. Now, this purchase price is not it's not an accurate way of evaluating your inventory. Weighted average price is a more accurate way, because that takes, if you bought one item at 20 cents and then next week you bought the same item at 40 cents, it will take the weighted average of those two items so that it gives you a value of 30 cents per item, because it's the weighted average of some at the lower rate, some at the higher rate, and gives you calculates the weight in between, or the price in between, so that it's a more accurate view, because you didn't purchase some of these items at 40 cents, you purchased them at 20, and you don't want them all to read 40 cents, because that's overstating it. Sales price and job price also give you options for marking it up. You can base it, the markup based on price, or you can base the price on the markup percentage. Base it either by the markup percentage or by the price. And these are the GL account numbers that your inventory is going to post to. And then these are different options where you can include sales tax, discounts, or freight, or warn if there's a negative or zero quantity when you're entering a requisition. Warehouses, I use my binoculars here. This is where I can enter or set up a warehouse. Everybody has a main warehouse that comes standard, and then you can set up new warehouse numbers as you need to. Product classes, again, my binoculars show me the different product classes that I have set up that I want to use in my inventory items to sort them into different class IDs. Conversion is the same conversion factor that we saw in purchase order. You can unpost requisitions if you need to reopen a requisition to change it. You can zero quantities on hand. If you're going to do a physical inventory, you're going to need to zero your quantities on hand first before you can plug in your new numbers. This will go out and zero all the quantities on hand for each item in inventory. Then you would enter a negative requisition. A negative requisition would add the inventory back onto the item. Positive requisition removes it from the item, and negative requisition adds it on. You would enter a negative requisition for your actual numbers to get your actual items balances back on there, quantities back on there. The reason you'd want to do it as a requisition and not a receipt is because a receipt has no general ledger accounting effect. Requisition will have general ledger accounting effect and will then populate a value on your inventory GL number so that it's at the right value with what you actually have on hand. You can import items using this item import feature. That is slightly different than transaction imports, because transaction imports can be, transaction imports are for importing requisitions. If you have your actual count and you're ready to import your actual quantities on hand, you can set them up as in the IN transaction import as negative requisitions instead of manually entering them. Or you can enter receipts. You can manually import receipts if you have receipts from another program that you would enter, and you don't want to enter them, you want to import them. This is a transaction import. The one under admin is the item import, where you would import a list of items. Again, everything that imports into our software is usually from an Excel spreadsheet. This up here where it says INV, this is an inventory list. It's kind of like a Rolodex where you can scroll through here. I can type and seek if I want to see material, or if I want to go up to journeyman labor, whatever I want to look at. I can just look at whatever information is here, so I can see the purchase price, the sales price, the job price. I can't make any changes on the screen, but I can just look up that information. Now, if there are no questions, that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you for attending, and if you have any questions, you can always feel free to call the office.